Welcome, everybody. I'm Dave Fortson from Regen Network and host of Greenproofing. I am super excited today to bring in Marlene all the way from Vienna, Austria. She is in the aluminum industry, and we're going to learn about how this material that touches every part of our lives is doing its part to become more sustainable and reduce its impact and build a better world. Welcome, Marlene. Thank you for joining us from Vienna. How are you today?
Thanks a lot for the invitation, Dave. I'm having a fantastic day. I just returned from Technical University of Vienna, where I taught my circular economy course.
Wonderful. Maybe we'll dig into that a little bit. First of all, this show is about sustainability professionals. Thankfully, a growing group. We're working all over the world in different capacities. We've all arrived here with different stories. Could you start by sharing a bit more about your story? How did you arrive as the head of sustainability for High Aluminum? What was your journey like? What inspired you? Give us a little background so people can understand who you are.
Well, this was actually a very long journey until I ended up in the sustainability space. After I studied economics, I wanted to save the world. Somehow I took a turn and ended up in investment banking. Investment banking was really interesting for a while because the learning curve is really high, but I always noticed something was missing, a sort of emptiness. I moved on to venture capital because I thought that working with startups, with founders, where there is a lot of passion, this could be it. I moved to Singapore with my partner at the time, did fundraising for startups, stayed in the space, but the voice came creeping up again. And I was like, this is nice, but somehow still something is missing. And I couldn't really point the finger to it. So I tried out different projects, trying to figure out what would really resonate with me. One day, I stumbled across the concept of the circular economy. And I was like, this is it. This concept makes so much sense because it's not just about documenting stuff, but it's really about how we manage the resources we produce effectively. How do we make sure that we generate less waste, that we keep everything in the loop for as long as possible? I was just like, this is going to be the concept that will keep us busy for the next 30 years. I was so excited about it. Then I was like, okay, but how do I actually fit into this space? I was a banker. Circular economy, that gets very technical very quickly, deeply rooted in the industry. I was in Singapore at the time where sustainability was not exactly the topic. What I realized is that awareness for the circular economy was missing. So I started designing workshops and holding speeches to create awareness and maybe spark ideas, right? Like bring people together so they would talk to each other and maybe generate new ideas. That's basically how everything started. I then went back to Austria, joined the Circular Economy Forum Austria here, also started doing consulting work, lots of workshops, teaching at different universities, keynotes. So basically, very much at the base of everything, where you're really in a space where you're like, this is a new concept and people need to learn about it because the circular economy can only be applied if people know about it. So you basically just create awareness. And I did that for a while. I had a fantastic time, but I knew sooner or later I would have to go to the industry because this is where it actually happens. It's a lot of fun to think about creating new business models, but I also really wanted to get my hands dirty and be where it happens. And luckily I found the job at Hammer Aluminium Industries. It was also great because it combined the circular economy topic and sustainability, but also the political aspect. To implement the circular economy properly, you need the right political framework. For example, about what is classified as waste. It gets technical very quickly, but it's also now in these very uncertain times interesting to be in Brussels and see what's happening on the legislative level. Make sure our voice is heard.
Amazing. So aluminum is something that all of us literally put our hands on in some form or fashion. Our products, consumer products, large purchases have aluminum somewhere in their supply chain or embedded in the product. It's kind of ubiquitous. It's wrapped in nice branding and you can't quite tell, but there's always the aluminum feel, whether it's a beverage container, your vehicle, machinery, you name it. So help me understand. You had already had training on circular economy. Now you enter this company providing a core material to make the global economy run. How did you approach this as a sustainability professional to better understand what were the opportunities you thought were important to examine and take action on to further understand and reduce the impact of this ubiquitous material that all of us depend on?
Aluminum is actually one of the perfect materials for decarbonization because you need it for all the technologies that support a green transition, like EVs, like photovoltaic. So it is really important. I mean, when I entered the firm, I did a lot of walks through the production site to understand how the company works, right? So you need to understand what's happening there. I started by walking through the production site and getting explanations of what exactly is happening, how is it happening, what kind of resources are there, and I asked hundreds of questions. I just was very curious about the whole process. And I also just asked people, like, okay, so I'm new here. I don't have a background in aluminum, but you've been here for 20 years. So if you were me, what would you do?
For sure.
How can we become more sustainable? Where do you see that there is maybe waste? Where could we think about reducing impact? It was really interesting because when I first asked people, how do we become more sustainable? I could see people being like, well, what does it actually mean when we talk about sustainability? We don't really talk about what we think of as what sustainability is, right? So you have to break it down further because if you look at the media, it's always sustainability here, sustainability there. But what do we actually mean? What are the concrete things that we can do? Breaking that down, I found was really helpful, and I got a lot of valuable input from the production site workers. And the second thing that we did quite quickly is to get a corporate carbon footprint. We had been doing sustainability reports for 4 or 5 years already, but mostly focused on scope 1 and 2 emissions, where we have direct control. In aluminum, most of your emissions, especially when you're a recycler or a processing aluminum, is your scope 3 emissions. It's going to be the aluminum that you purchase. And I think it's really important to get a first layer of the data, because if you don't know where you are right now, it's really hard to improve your performance.
Amazing.
So data is key.
Talk to me about that. At Regen Network, we're in the impact verification business. So understanding how you define your methodology for reducing impact, creating sustainability, increasing biodiversity, like defining your methodologies, right? The practices you're implementing are super important. The other thing that's super important, as you pointed out, is data. Can you give us a snapshot on some of the key things that you're measuring? What are the benchmarks year over year you want to understand if those numbers are going up, down, or flatlined? Can you give us the granularity or the science behind the way you approach building an understanding of how you can increase performance when it comes to the impact you're making while maintaining or increasing the performance of the product itself?
Okay, the key metric we use is really the carbon footprint. Everything else contributes through that. For example, what you often hear, especially in aluminum, is recycled content. Recycled content is important because the impact of recycled content is much lower than if you use primary material. But in the end, it always ends up having the impact in the carbon footprint. Having a high recycled content, as we do, make sure that the carbon footprint of our product is low. But I think it's good to have one metric to focus on and orient yourself towards that, because what you often see is that if you have too many metrics, you don't really make progress on any of them. For us, the carbon footprint is really the main thing that we measure. Obviously, you break that down further, right? I mean, for once, of course, you look at at scope 1, where you look, okay, what is the energy intensity in terms of the gas that we use? We've invested quite a lot in modern extrusion presses and make sure that we use as little gas as possible. In terms of scope 2 emissions, we've completely changed to green electricity. We also have a lot of photovoltaic installations on our roofs, which is nice because we used our ultra low carbon aluminum line to produce the under construction of those panels as well. In Romania, for example, in our 2 plants there, we get 25 and 27% of the electricity need from these photovoltaic panels. So we're talking about huge photovoltaic installations there, And then in scope 3, this is where you have the biggest impact. What we look at here, where we have the biggest lever, is the primary material that we purchase. We only purchase low carbon primary material that is produced in Iceland with a low carbon footprint. We also make sure that the billets we purchase, we produce aluminum billets ourselves, but also purchase additional ones in the market. Here we get from our suppliers the carbon footprint. We also try to have a very European supply chain because, it's just something where we say it's resilient, but also transport is not so far. I mean, especially with aluminum, you don't want to ship it around the world
Sure.
if possible, right? And then obviously for our own billets that we manufacture, super high recycled content. We have an average recycled content of 80%. It helps us keep emissions down. So just so we get a bit of an idea of where we are in terms of carbon emissions, right? Our Sustainable 2.0 ultra low carbon line has emissions of less than 2 tons of CO2 per ton of aluminum billet. A billet produced with coal energy in China or India would have 27 tons of CO2
Oh, wow.
per ton of aluminum. So you see that the range is gigantic.
Can you help me understand? I have some limited experience in the aluminum world. I'm very proud. It was when I was a university student, but helped start the recycling program on campus. But I got to go to the MRF facilities where they do sorting. I really got to dig into why aluminum was so easy to recycle and why plastic was difficult. The nature of each of the materials we recycle, move out, are sometimes recycled. Sometimes you think they're recycled and they're not. But aluminum tends to be an all-star player when it comes to having a long life, but you still need virgin material. And as I understand it, even at the virgin material standpoint, choices there are important. Can you help us understand the relationship on a product performance level and what's optimal when it comes to the amount of recycled product and the amount of virgin? And when you're choosing virgin material, what are the kinds of choices that you have to make? How do you reduce impact there? What are the optimal ways of continuing to sharpen up how we bring this product to the world in the most ecologically sound way possible?
Something we all need to understand is that generally speaking, the global demand of aluminum is rising and it will keep on rising for the next couple of decades. We will not be able to satisfy all of the aluminum demand with recycling. So we will always need a certain amount of primary aluminum. However, it still makes sense to recycle as much as possible. 75% of all aluminum ever produced is still in
Population,
right?
sure.
That works very well. The markets are efficient. That's fantastic. But right now, we're only able to satisfy about 39% of aluminum demand with recycled content. Pre-industrial recycled content and post-consumer recycled content. I said that we have an average recycled content of 80%, which we do. But obviously, it means if only 40% can be covered by recycled content, we have 80. That means somebody will have less than 40. Like otherwise, it's not going to
Sure.
work. So I wouldn't say that there is an ideal amount of recycled content. We have batches that are 100% recycled content, right? I think that the limitations that you have is very much also in the specifications. Iron can be in the specific alloy you're using. Especially if you use post-consumer recycled content, there will be some iron or other elements that are not great for material properties. If you have very tight specifications, you may have to add more primary material to balance that out. In the end, it's still fine, right? Because you can recycle aluminum endlessly. If you don't get there with the specifications, you add a little bit more of primary materials or alloying elements. That makes aluminum a fantastic material, but I don't think there is an ideal recycled content. We should use as much recycled content as possible, but if you look at global demand, it's not possible to cover everything with recycled content. In terms of primary material, we would actually go for one that is with low carbon footprint as well, which means that the smelter uses green electricity. This is why Iceland, Norway, or Canada are very good suppliers here, because they have a lot of water around and green electricity.
Essentially, being able to make choices when you're using primary, there are opportunities as a sustainability professional to source wisely. That is based on the natural characteristics of the geographic locations, access to water, and their ability to integrate renewable energy or other practices.
Yes, I mean, here we also look at the carbon footprint, and I think this is what is great about the aluminum industry. We actually get a carbon footprint suppliers. We demand it. It's quite standard to get that from your suppliers. Aluminum is quite leading in that sense because this is not normal that you get a carbon footprint for everything, or EPDs, etc. So we actually have proof for that. Most of the time, third party, externally verified as well. So you have confidence in the data provided. The whole sustainability topic is not very old. There is still learning happening in this industry, especially on the methodologies on how to do carbon accounting correctly, which methodology to use. But in the end, what I love is that there is a lot of data already and the foundation is there. Now we just have to tweak it, improve, and move further.
Great. To help us close out the show today, Marlene, what is bringing you hope right now? Right, that's you're in an industry that touches the globe. You're aware, just as I am, as some of the challenges we face as a human species around climate. But clearly, you and fellow sustainability professionals are making an impact. Can you help me understand what you are excited or hopeful about as you move forward in this space?
I love my job. I still think I have the best job in the world, hands down. I teach quite a bit, right? And I think the way that you guys found me is because I did something for kids to teach them about sustainability. What I find amazing is I had these kids, I think they were between 4 and 12. And it's incredible how much they know about sustainability already. When I asked the question, I had like 20 kids being like, hey, take me, take me. That is incredible. And then I taught master students at Technical University of Vienna. The classroom is packed. And there is like lively discussions for 2 hours about how do we implement circular economy, but what would it actually mean on a societal level. It's incredible to see all of these young people being so engaged in the topic and wanting to do something. That gives me a lot of hope, especially in a time when there is a crazy amount of uncertainty. But I think uncertainty also bears a lot of opportunity, and we should know that.
Well, from Santa Barbara to Vienna, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate how you show up in the space and your dedication to education, this next generation, whether they're 4 or 5 years old or whatever, all the way to your master students. I think they're lucky to have your passion and experience brought to bear in that space. Thank you so much and appreciate your work in this field.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.